Seiko and Citizen are massive Japanese brands that have risen to iconic status in part by producing professional-grade mechanical dive watches at impressively attainable price points. And in this video, we'll compare the established Seiko Prospex Turtle and the newer Promaster Diver Automatic known as the Fugu from Citizen. So how this works is we have 13 categories where we will be comparing each of these watches head to head. Each category is worth 1 point, and at the end, we'll tally up the score, discuss who is the winner, as well as some final points of consideration before you look to buy. This is not intended to be an in-depth review, so I will link to more traditional reviews down below if you also want to check those out. For our categories here, we have optionality, wearability, versatility, strap and bracelet, bezel, lume, water resistance, crystal, QC, movement, heritage/brand equity, and then price. Also, I do want to mention for the next 48 hours, you can get 2 free NATO straps with your purchase of either of these watches by putting in promo code TURTLEFUGU. It only lasts for 48 hours. How that's going to work, just add the promo code, put the watch and the 2 NATOs in your cart, and the NATO's prices will be marked out for free. This code is only going to work for the next 48 hours, so act fast if you are interested. Now for our first category, we have optionality, and this win is going to go to Seiko. Simply put, the Turtle is going to offer more variants compared to the Fugu. The Fugu is becoming more readily available in different markets around the globe, but traditionally is more of a classic JDM model. The Turtle certainly has this as well with its JDM reach and expansiveness, but also within individual markets, specifically here in the US, there are just more Turtle models. So now the next category is going to be wearability. How do the watches wear on the wrist? The strange thing here is if you measure the dials, they're both exactly the same, 31.8 millimeters. But then you factor in the cases and then the equation changes. For the Turtle, 45 millimeters in diameter by 47.7 millimeters on the lug to lug and 13.4 millimeters in thickness. For the Citizen Fugu, 44 millimeters in diameter, 50 millimeters lug to lug and 12.8 millimeters in thickness. Generally, when you have these watches strapped on, the biggest thing that is going to allow one watch to separate from the other is going to be that lug-to-lug distance. The Turtle wears more compact and is actually going to wear smaller despite the larger case diameter. And the thickness for me, I don't think there's enough of a feeling when you have them on the wrist to really see that one is thicker than the other. But that lug-to-lug is very present. When you factor in that lug length, the Turtle is going to wear more compact, and I would think is going to be more viable for a wide variety of wrists out there. So I'm going to also give the edge to the Turtle for the second category. For our third category, we have versatility. And this is more looking at how viable is the watch to be worn in a wide variety of environments. And for me, I'm going to also give the edge to the Seiko Turtle here. The Turtle offers more of a 1970s heritage look that I think is easier to dress up. I wouldn't say that it's something you're going to be grabbing when you're putting on your suit, but still could be dressed up more and has more viability in that lane compared to the more modern and aggressive looking Fugu. It just doesn't have that more traditional look, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think when you're talking about just having more play and to be able to reach for it more often, if you are looking to say dress it up or have a pretty mixed lifestyle in what you're looking for, the Turtle is probably going to be the better pick there as well. For the strap and bracelet, I'm going to chalk this up as a tie. I would say that the Citizen might have a slight edge in the strap category, given that it is a little bit slimmer, and I think it will wear better on a wide variety of wrists. But just generally, I think both of them not going to be the greatest. You're probably going to be swapping out for something else instead. The same can be said for the bracelet, getting some micro adjustment and offering up a dive extension, but it does just leave a lot to be desired. The clasps are going to be stamped. Not a crazy level of refinement here. And I would say they're pretty much of the same general level in quality. Now we have bezel, and this is where the Citizen is going to get its first sole ownership of its point. This, I think, easily goes to Citizen. Both are going to be unidirectional 120 click bezels with printed aluminum inserts, but the Citizen action just feels better in my hands. It feels more locked in, it has less play, and offers more audible feedback in its operation. Again, there is the King Turtle that's going to be slightly above where the ceramic insert's going to come into play, but for these watches, I just think that the Citizen is a bit more consistent and feels more refined when rotating. There's just that subtle play with the Seiko at times. I've handled a lot of them, and that does come into play with its play. And when you're talking about actual diving circumstances and a time-elapse bezel, I'd want something that's more secure. And for that, the Citizen wins. For the case and dial finish, I would also throw this up as a tie. For the cases, very similar, polished on the sides with some brushing on top. The Seiko does have a bit more of a pop in terms of on its side of the bezel with its ridges, and does maybe have a slight edge on the finishing of its case. But then on the flip side, I think the Citizen wins on the dial side of things. It has more raised elements, see some more polishing. It just has some more three-dimensionality to it, which allows some more visual interest to take place. And I think it's on a level it's a bit more refined, despite being more aggressive in its markers. Also, the matching day-date wheel is a nice touch. Maybe not much of a finishing point, but in terms of maybe going the extra mile, it is nice to see. Now for our next category, we have Lume. And Lume was a tough one. Both of these watches are class leading. They are amazing dive watches for any price range. If you put these next to a Rolex Submariner, Tudor Black Bay, Omega Seamaster Diver 300, these watches from the Lume side of things are that good and will probably beat those watches. Actually, they're usually better when I've seen most of these and testing them out even against some of the best luxury watches out there. But when they're both charged, it's very close to call. They're both exceptional. But then we stepped out of the room, we gave it some more time to slowly fade, and we noticed that the Seiko was more consistent and there was not as much of a fall off compared to the Citizen. So after 5 minutes, you could notice that the Seiko was stronger for longer compared to the Citizen. Not by much, this is very close, but it was still detectable enough where I think you have to give a slight point and edge to Seiko here. For water resistance, it's going to be a tie. Both offer 200 meters and are ISO 6425 compliant, so truly professional dive watches with great water resistance. This one's easy, chalk it up as a tie. Next we have Crystal, and this one is a clear winner. This goes to Citizen. Citizen offers a sapphire crystal as standard, as well as anti-reflective coating that works well in practice. Seiko has its Hardlex mineral, which is going to offer up some nice visibility, but is going to show scratches. So easy win here for the Citizen. Next we have QC, quality control. I felt this was worth mentioning because of some of the reputation that Seiko has at times with its dive watches, primarily with its chapter ring alignment and things of this nature. And I did want to mention this as a point because I think Citizen is overlooked at how solid they are typically at this. I've handled thousands of Seiko watches, thousands of Citizen watches, and I would say Citizen is much more consistent on quality control. Usually the bezel action is going to be much tighter with less play. The chapter ring is typically usually aligned in comparison to Seiko. We've all seen and heard about the issues there. I think Citizen deserves its props there, considering of how many people traditionally just go for Seiko and are able to overlook some of these QC points when Citizen usually delivers much more consistently on this end, and also when looking at regulation, which will transition into our next point. So for movements here, we have two staples in affordable Japanese watchmaking. First, with Citizen, we have their third-party production arm in movement manufacturing in Miyota, falls underneath their larger group structure. Here we have the 8204, 40 hours of power reserve, plus to minus of minus 20 to plus 40 seconds a day, quoted by the factory. Then you have Seiko with the 4R36, 40 hours of power reserve, so matches right there, but a longer range of deviation, plus 45 seconds a day to minus 35 seconds a day. And just as an aside, both do offer hacking and hand winding. So Citizen and the Miyota caliber is going to have a tighter range of quoted range of deviation compared to Seiko, and they're very true on that. I also find that their watches typically are slightly better regulated compared to Seiko's. Just come into it with the right expectation. Both of these are not going to be the most accurate watches in the world, but I think you have to give the edge to Miyota here, or with Citizen here, to get that point. So now for our next point, we have heritage and brand equity. So this is closer than I think many people want to probably admit, but Seiko does get the edge. Seiko's history with real dive watches simply stretched back further, starting with the 62 Mas in 1965. Citizen released some diving models under the 7 Stars name the same year, but those watches were 100 meters and didn't have the impact of Seiko's early divers. Over the decades, Seiko has also simply produced more impactful dive watches, the 6105, 6309, the Arnie, SKX, just to name a few. But I do want to give major credit to Citizen. Most people just overlooked their diving credibility. I talked to Ben, who's our content manager. We were going through the checklist here because this is a segment of watches that we're very familiar with, especially him though, because he was a commercial diver in the past. He told me that if you go diving or you go out with some divers, you're gonna notice a lot of Citizens out there. So in terms of the actual diving community, Citizen does get a lot of love, but still for heritage, brand equity, I think you have to give Seiko a slight edge from speaking from the mass market perspective. And then for price, you also are going to have to give the edge to Seiko. Seiko retail price $495 versus the comparable Citizen, same configuration, $550. These watches you also will find generally discounted as well, but typically when that happens, Seiko still is going to get the edge. So that concludes our 13 categories. What are our totals? Seiko came away with 9 total points and Citizen came with 7 total points. So do I agree with the general consensus here? Generally speaking, yes. I do think more people are going to probably be better suited to go for the Seiko Turtle compared to the Citizen Fugu Promaster. That said, this does not include design, so if you like the design of the Citizen more, that is also going to be a consideration. Whatever you like on the design front, that's going to ultimately trump what is going to be found from this kind of breakdown of what you prefer. This is more looking at it from a very objective lens and very controlled lens without any feelings involved, but that is not what watch collecting is all about at the end of the day. So that is to also be mentioned here. But one final point that I will say here that was not demonstrated is that Citizen is much closer than you might expect compared to Seiko. I think from a design perspective, Seiko is more mass appealing. They of course have the heritage of dive watches, but so does Citizen. In terms of professional grade dive watches, I think many people have just generally fallen into saying, okay, Seiko is going to be the choice. That's where you start. I don't think it always has to be that. I don't think Seiko is always going to be the slam dunk choice. I think for many, yes, it is going to be the choice, but Citizen is much closer than I believe many people give them credit for. So this was a close battle. These are 2 great dive watches. If you want a true professional dive watch from Japan, they both have their pros and cons associated with them, where one is better than the other, but it's ultimately up to you guys to decide. This was when breaking this down, some of the categories that I think many buyers would look for. If you did find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's a great way to know whether or not you guys want to see more of this in the future. You like these comparison style videos, and if you do like these style of videos, let me know another comparison you'd like to see in the future that you want to see 2 watches go head to head. Also, definitely check out that NATO strap promo, Turtle, Fugu at checkout, 2 free NATO straps with your purchase for the next 48 hours. But all right, guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.